While Monster Hunter World has the Iceborne expansion coming later this year with new features, monsters, and updates, it is rumored that a new Monster Hunter game is coming to the Nintendo Switch later this year. While we have time to wait for this new title, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about what features we'd like to see in the upcoming game. I am Reaverjolt, and we will be talking about the top 10 things we'd like to see in the new Monster Hunter game. Number 10. Fast and Fluid Gathering. One of the great features of Monster Hunter World is being able to gather quickly on the go. It makes gathering less grindy. This feature would be a great addition to the new game, and it would be a lot less tedious for the players who just want to get more action and less grind, and those who tend to run out of resources like herbs or honey. Number 9. An in-game armor builder. One feature in Monster Hunter World that makes it easy to make mix sets is using search filtering for skills and putting together an armor set for a particular skill. But while this may be a simple way to make an armor set, there's no real way to tell what your final build will be until you get the decorations for those skills, and then you end up having to change armor pieces and your zenny gets wasted. So a good feature to add in the next game, at least to unlock later on, is an in-game armor builder or dressing room that allows you to put together your dream set. You could even fill any decoration slots and equip charms you don't have just to see what you come up with before you go out and grind those required materials. Planning that dream set shouldn't have to require outside sources like armor searcher apps. This feature would attract a good number of players that like to create goals, which brings us to our next wanted feature. Number 8. A wishlist system. And yes, once again I mentioned a nice feature from Monster Hunter World because the quality of life changes they did for that game are excellent. It would just be a shame not to add these to future Monster Hunter games, which is why I mentioned them. Anyway, the wishlist system was a nice little addition they did for Monster Hunter World, but it's limited, and you can't add more than 6 items to your list. And if you're like me, and you want a good number of things added to a wishlist, 6 just doesn't cut it. It would have been better if there was a limit of 10 or 20 items you can add. So in the new Monster Hunter game, there should be a wishlist system, but it should have more room for more items. Number 7. A new weapon type. Now we haven't seen any new weapon debuts until the Charge Blade and Insect Glaive came out, or the Prowler if you want to consider that a weapon. In my honest opinion though, I think the weapon roster is fine, but it would be nice to see a new weapon type in the new game. If it were up to me though, I would decide on a chain weapon like a chain whip, but instead of it hanging, it would be retractable, and be two-handed like a greatsword or longsword. It would be able to grab smaller monsters and drag them to you. With larger monsters, it would allow you to grab the legs and trip them. That is if they decide to add that as a hunter art. And it would do multiple damage for each part of the chain blade, but each hit would do less damage than some of the single hit weapons. This would be a weapon I'd like to see. Number 6. New and returning subspecies, rare species, and possibly deviants. This is a big one for me because I like a big variety of monsters, especially if they have something new to offer. Of course, we want new monsters and types of monsters to add variety. I like the subspecies of monsters, but more than that, I really like the rare species and deviant monsters. One of my favorite deviants is Bolt Reaver Astalos, but the chance of seeing it in a new game are slim because you kinda can't have Astalos without the rest of the Fated Four, and it's not likely that they'll return in the new game. Besides that, the one monster that absolutely needs to return in my opinion is Abyssal Lagiacrus. This is my all-time favorite monster, and it's kinda a shame that it didn't return in MHGU, or the fact that there isn't a deviant Lagiacrus yet, which is surprising because of how popular Lagiacrus is. If Capcom adds all the Lagiacrus species in the new game, assuming they add a swimming mechanic, I will definitely go for the Abyssal's armor set, and weapons. Number 5. Better descriptions for armor skills. One of the most confusing things in Monster Hunter for those who are just starting out making mix sets is the descriptions and the many names of a skill. For example, Handicraft gives sharpness, but sharpness gives razor sharp, or a decoration that boosts endurance skills. You see how confusing this is? MHGU and MHW with latent power don't do a very good job of describing what the skills actually do. This is something that needs to be addressed in the new Monster Hunter game. They need to just have one skill name for each skill and tell what they actually do so it's easy for people to understand. Number 4. Better graphics. It's good that PC, Xbox One, and PS4 got Monster Hunter World, but the Switch isn't gonna get it. We did get MHGU for the Switch, but it's a port from the previous 3DS game MHGen, and the graphics for that game aren't up to date. We know that the Nintendo Switch can run games with high graphics, and a Monster Hunter title would be no exception. I'm not exactly sure if they'll replicate the graphics from Monster Hunter World, but they might go with a different art style for the graphics that the Nintendo Switch can handle. Number 3. Story and interesting characters with names. As great as the Monster Hunter franchise is, it never really had good story or interesting characters. Most of the characters don't have real names. I mean, come on now. The Handler, the Smart Biologist, the Commander? I know there's Monster Hunter stories, but that's not mainstream, and therefore it doesn't count. I also know that Monster Hunter was never really about the story or the characters and more about the gameplay and progression. But you gotta admit, they could have done a better job with the story, especially in Monster Hunter World. The story is not interesting at all, and it can get annoying to get through cutscenes, especially if you're in a group. And only a fraction of the characters are likable. The Handler is one of the most disliked characters in Monster Hunter World, and possibly in Monster Hunter history. She makes most players wish they had the serious Handler instead. A seemingly good character that players can connect with. That is, if there was ever a good story in the first place. But alas, they never gave us this character. Anyway, enough talk about the bad story. We as hunters want to be a part of a really good story with interesting characters with real names, and a really good progression system with good gameplay. Number 2. Just the right amount of content. Until Iceborne comes out, Monster Hunter World doesn't have a whole lot of content. MHGU, on the other hand, has a huge amount of content. The only issue it has is that it may perhaps have too much content. And while that may be good for some who play for a lot of hours, it's quite overwhelming for most players who don't have a lot of time, especially if they're completionists who want to complete every single quest before the next game launches. So the best thing in this case for Capcom to do, at least in my opinion, is to have just the right amount of content. Now that may not be saying much, but think about it. Are you someone who loves a lot of content but you're not sure you'll finish the game in time before the next game comes out? Then having just the right amount would balance that out for you. This potential balance of content would benefit everyone, and I think most will agree. Number 1. G-Rank/Master Rank should already be included. I know that there will be a Master Rank in Monster Hunter World when Iceborne comes out, but I'm going to refer to this as G-Rank for the purposes of the new game. This is probably the most wanted thing for almost every fan of the Monster Hunter franchise. G-Rank should already be in the base game when it comes out. There is a pattern that Capcom has in the franchise for every Monster Hunter game they release. An Ultimate expansion of that game releases a few years later as a different game that you have to buy separately. For example, Monster Hunter Tri, then Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate a few years later. Monster Hunter Generations. Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate releases a few years later. You get the picture here? The only game that released without a previous version, at least in the US, was Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. When that game released in the US, it was the complete package. It had G-Rank already. This is one of the reasons Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate is one of the best games in the franchise. So the same should be done for the new game. The least they can do is release the game first and release a G-Rank update in the game instead of releasing a separate game altogether. That's all for now. I know that these expectations may be a bit high, but these features would be great in the new game coming. There isn't a great deal of information about the game yet, but hopefully there will be more information in March. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see in the new Monster Hunter game. Anyways, be kind to one another, and have a most wonderful day.